Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to what is going to be a new 4-part series all about tackling, confronting, dealing with your worst fears when it comes to clients and working with illustration clients. So a few days ago, I put out a request on Instagram and Twitter for you guys to send me the things that you are most afraid of, the things that keep you up at night when it comes to working with illustration clients, or the possibility of working with illustration clients if you're still new and you haven't yet actually done that. And you all were so kind and sent so many responses. And I really appreciate the time that every one of you took to share your fears and the courage that it took for you to share your fears. I did my best to respond to as many of those questions personally as I could. I wasn't able to get to every single one, but I read them all and I have gathered them together and grouped them together. It was amazing how similar they were across different experience levels, different parts of the world. We all tend to kind of fixate on and struggle with some of the same challenges here. So I've grouped them together into 4 different groups. Each group will be a video, and in each video we'll kind of unpack several different specific fears. So this group, today's group, I'm kind of calling, in my notes I've called it the confidence group, the fears that have to do with confidence, or I guess the lack thereof, struggles with self-confidence, struggles with self-doubt. So we are going to jump right into that video first. I do want to say one thing quick about the overall series, and that is that I will be going into quite a lot of specific detail and talking about some concrete things, concrete steps that you can take that will hopefully help mitigate some of these fears. But a lot of it is just going to be like 2 friends chatting and me trying to share some things that have been encouraging for me, and hopefully they're encouraging for you. And today's video in particular, since we're going to be dealing with something that is more kind of on the mostly feelings side, as opposed to, something like money or revisions that has a lot of concrete structural things that we'll be unpacking. Today is going to be, a little bit more like a coffee shop chat. So if you are up for that, I hope you will come along and join us. And, if you're watching this video a few weeks in the future, be sure to check in the description box, because I will go back and put the links to the subsequent videos in there once those are out. So, all right, let's go ahead and dive into the first fear. So the first fear we're going to address today, and this is one that came up over and over again in all of your submissions and all of your sharing about the things that freak you out, and that is you're afraid of looking like a newbie or of doing something unprofessional. So I think it's kind of a good news, bad news situation here. The good news is that in terms of looking professional, there are certain things that you can do that will, professional practices, I guess. And I do go over quite a lot of those in my new Skillshare class. I will be mentioning that class a lot in this series. I wasn't intending to do that. I didn't make this series because I was looking for a way to promote the Skillshare class. I wanted to talk about fears, and specifically client fears, client-related fears. And as I was kind of taking my notes and thinking through what I wanted to say, I realized a lot of that will be applicable to stuff that comes up in that class. So you'll hear me mention it a few times, but yes, so there are some professional practices, but that's a very loose way of saying it. It's not like, being a nurse or even being a lawyer where there's really concrete prescribed things that you have to do at certain phases that everybody does in the same way. It is highly variable. Even, from my perspective, when I work with different art directors, each art director is a bit different. Each client is a bit different. So yes, there are like professional things that you can do, professional practices, but I don't think you have to be quite so afraid of looking unprofessional. To me, unprofessional is like, not following through on something that you said you were going to do, or, being really rude or unkind, those kinds of things, which, if you guys are watching this channel, you're probably very nice people and you're probably not going to do those things anyway. So, that's the good news. Don't lose too much sleep over the professionalism. And I guess the bad news, which is still good news in a way, is that you probably will look like a newbie at some point. And that is because you are a newbie. And whether you're, whether you're a beginner, like in the most literal sense of the word, and that you have never worked with clients before, or whether you're like me, where you have worked with quite a lot of clients and you have, several years of experience in the commercial illustration industry, but each specific project, each client, each thing that you work on is still new to you. So you get the privilege of being a beginner over and over again throughout your career. And from my perspective, if you are honest with yourself about the fact, if you're honest with yourself about your starting point, there actually are a lot of potential strengths of being a beginner and reasons to embrace the fact that you're a newbie or that you're a beginner. Number one of those in my book is that curiosity, is that you're curious when you're a beginner, and genuine curiosity and wanting to know and understand where the other person is coming from. That is such an asset in the illustration industry, in your career as an illustrator. So I would encourage you to just embrace that, embrace your curiosity and your willingness to ask questions. And I guess the other side of that, the other side of embracing curiosity when you're a newbie or a beginner, is that some of us, when we are in that position where we feel like we don't quite know what we're doing or where we're new at it, we can have a tendency to feel a little bit defensive, or maybe even to kind of try to puff ourselves up, kind of like pufferfish almost, like when we feel threatened or when we feel a little bit like we're not sure where we stand, we have a tendency to try to make ourselves, feel bigger, or to kind of push that small feeling away. And I would encourage you to try to do the opposite. So fake it till you make it is good advice. Well, there's some good advice in there, but I think that can get turned into like almost like a kind of bravado where you are, being the big pufferfish instead of being honest with yourself about the fact that you feel small right then. So I would say, don't try to puff yourself up if you're feeling small. Try to admit to yourself and accept that you feel that way. And remind yourself that even if you're small, even if you're feeling, kind of tiny where you're at the moment, that you can make a choice to keep moving anyway. That you're still, even if you're small, you're still strong. Even if you're small, you're still determined. Even if you're small, most importantly, you can still be kind. So that would be kind of the number one thing I would say. And in the series, we will talk more about kind of concrete, specific things, as I've said, specific structures and practices that can really kind of help you build up your own process and hopefully feel less like a newbie, less like a beginner. And that will hopefully translate into more confidence for you. But even with the best tips, even with the most honest, real advice and the most carefully thought out, concrete, practical steps, you will probably still feel like a newbie. And that is totally okay, because once again, you are a newbie and there's no way of getting around that. And the sooner you can accept that, the more you'll be able to focus on the other things that you can change. Like many things in life, the only way to learn, I don't even want to say to get past being a beginner or to get over being a newbie, because I really do genuinely believe, I work hard to keep that, I'm happy and proud to think of myself as a lifelong learner and as somebody who always wants to have that posture and that curiosity of a beginner. But the only way that you're really also going to then feel a little bit more confident along with that is actually by doing it. So just the same way as if you were learning to ride a bike or learning to make sourdough bread, or, what's something else that you might learn to do, like solving math problems, any of those things, you can read all the techniques, you can watch the videos, you can learn the insider tips. But when you're dealing with all that just on a purely abstract level, you're not actually really learning how to do it. And you're not, more importantly, you're not learning how to do it within your unique context. So all the things that are going to make it more challenging for you, or all the things that are going to be your unique strengths, those are all going to come into play when it comes time to actually put those things, all those tips that you've been accumulating, all that knowledge that you've been kind of squirreling away in your mind or in sketchbooks or whatever, that is going to become real when you actually do it. So you you should by all means watch this video series. I hope it will be very helpful for you. You can take my new Skillshare class. I hope that will be helpful for you too. You can read books. You can watch other videos. Do all of those things. I'm not trying to dissuade you from doing that. But what I do want to say is that you are never going to feel ready. Doing all of those things, you could learn as much as is humanly possible, and you still may not feel really ready to dive in. So I say that just because a lot of folks, I think, are under the impression that if they feel like a beginner, if they feel like a newbie, if they don't feel like they're ready, then that means that they're not ready, rather than recognizing that ready means that you are willing to actually do the thing despite the fact that you feel that way. So just remind yourself that you will feel uncomfortable, you will make mistakes. Those things are normal. The most important thing is that you can continue to be kind and be strong and keep moving forward despite the way that you feel. All right, next one, fear of reaching out to clients because of anticipating the rejection that you might receive. All right, this is another super common fear. Tons of people mention this one. And I want to say two things about it up front. Number one, if you are still in the phase where you're kind of working on establishing your portfolio, where you're trying to get a consistent look and feel to your work, maybe you're still experimenting quite a bit, this isn't even really something that you need to worry about anyway right now. So you can tackle this fear another time, put it on the back burner for now and just focus on continuing to make your work and get your style up to a consistent level. And then the other thing I would mention about this is that some illustrators, myself included, don't get a ton of mileage from reaching out to clients directly. So that's not to say that you shouldn't do it or that you shouldn't try it, but I think a lot of people feel like this is the end all be all, and that once they do this, then they'll start, landing tons of professional work. And that also, of course, makes it feel even more intimidating, more scary. And it doesn't necessarily need to be. You may end up being somebody who's like me, who has done it a little bit, but who has mostly gotten clients because they found her on a Google search or on Instagram or whatever. So just keep that in mind. And then I guess, the next thing to say about this is just that rejection is going to happen. Rejection is a part of life, and it's especially a part of any sort of creative career where you are making something and putting it out there for other people to consume. There will be some form of rejection. And I think a lot of us, myself included, are afraid of the kind of rejection that's, really like the door kind of slamming in your face, you showing your work and somebody saying, this is terrible, this is hideous, I hate it. And then you kind of crawling away, feeling terrible and sad about yourself as a result, when in reality, rejection is going to come kind of more in the form of crickets and silence and non-response. That's going to be much more common than the really loud, obvious forms of rejection. Most art directors are really pretty busy people, so it's not at all uncommon if you email 30 art directors to not hear back from more than one or two. Or, if you're just starting out, you might not even hear back from any. Some of it comes with consistency and replying over time. Now, if and when I do send out a client update, which I still am not as good about it as I should be, I hear back from maybe 5 to 10% of people, and that number is so high because a lot of the people on my list are people that I've worked with before. So, purely for relational reasons, they reply just to, say, hey. But if you don't actually know anybody on your list, if these are 30 cold emails, it would not be surprising at all if there's 30 people on there that don't respond to you. And before you start wringing your hands and feeling like, wow, it's 30 people who rejected me, 30 people who didn't like my work because I just heard crickets and there was no actual response, that's not the case at all. There could be 10 people on there who didn't open the email because they're too busy. Then another 10 people who felt like, this isn't really the right fit for the stuff that I'm working on right now, that the client needs right now. And then there could be another 10 people who thought it was great and who saved the email, and they might all do exactly the same thing, and that is not reply to you. So you can't get too hung up on it. And if you feel like you are at a point where your portfolio is pretty consistent and you have that good, 20 to 30 pieces that look like they were made by the same person, then in that sense, I think you're ready to reach out to clients if you want to, if that's something that you want to try. And I suppose I can't completely guarantee you that you won't have somebody email you back and say, wow, your work isn't good, or I don't like it, or honestly, I would just be so shocked if an art director said that. I could see, maybe somebody saying this isn't the right fit for us right now. But even then, they're so busy, they're much more likely just to not reply, to just not send you anything. So if you're dreading the big door slammed in your face, know that it probably won't happen that way. And maybe that makes you feel a little bit better and a little bit bolder. I hope so. But yeah, go ahead and try reaching out to some clients. Rejection's going to happen. You'll have those crickets, and then there will be plenty of other rejection in other areas of your career and in life. But reaching out to clients doesn't have to be the big scary thing that we sometimes make it out to be. All right, the third fear we're going to tackle is not feeling confident and not feeling good enough. So let's unpack the second half of this fear first, and that is not feeling good enough. Good enough is a very subjective and constantly moving target. I think a lot of us fixate on that, and I get questions all the time from people wanting to know if I can take a look at their portfolio and let them know if they're good enough. That is not the most helpful metric, because there are so many different things that constitute good. We have our different tastes, of course. There are the different objectives and goals and things that the illustration would actually be used for, the kind of problems it would be solving for the client or the art director. You could have good enough means something totally different for a hyper realist than it does for a flat vector illustrator. So very different considerations, very different measuring sticks. There isn't like a single point in time where you'll say, okay, and now my work is good enough and now I can be a professional. It's much more subjective than that. So just so you don't feel like you're completely lost in the woods on that, I think the thing that is more helpful, I find, than focusing on good enough is focusing on consistency, and consistency as a measure of readiness when you're ready to actually work with clients. So I've mentioned this before, but I think before in this very video, I've mentioned this, having a portfolio with somewhere between 20 to 30 images that all look reliably like they were made by the same person. Sometimes it can be tough to tell on your own whether your portfolio is consistent or not. A lot of us really struggle with that, and either overestimating it or underestimating. So if you have some online art friends or some in real life art friends that you can ask to look at your portfolio and just say, hey, what do you think of this in terms of consistency? Can you tell that this was made by me? Can you tell that this was all, made by the same person? And along with that, of course, would be, that you're making your own work. So not only is it consistent, but, sometimes I'll get that question from folks and I go and look, and all that they have in their portfolio is copies of other people's work. And I think that that's a part of how people learn. It wasn't necessarily something I did myself, but a lot of people do that. A lot of people copy other artists when they're kind of first getting started and they're learning. So I'm not criticizing that at all. But if your work is consistent, but it's consistent all based on somebody else's work, that's probably not quite yet. Probably not quite there yet either. So if you're making you're making your own work, your own concepts, your own approach, and then has that consistent style throughout, that would be kind of the key for me. That would be what I would think of more instead of good enough. And of course, there is a whole section on this actually in my new Skillshare class, all about evaluating your own portfolio and how to tell when it's at a professional level. So if you're interested, check the description box for the link. As for the other part of this fear, feeling confident, to me, that is honestly the much trickier thing here, the thing that's more difficult to provide any sort of insight or advice on. Probably because I still struggle with it so much myself. I can say very honestly that I do feel more confident than I did 5 years ago. And I certainly feel more confident than I did 7 years ago. I think maybe the word that comes to mind even more than competent is just competent. I know for the most part that I can do the work, and that is a good feeling. So like anything else, I guess, in that regard, you do get better at it, by doing it, just as I've been suggesting. But at another level, even though I feel more competent and more confident overall, I still really struggle on a regular basis with, self-doubt and a very loud inner critic. And two things that have really helped me with this are, this probably isn't going to surprise you, but number one is acceptance and practicing acceptance. I think I spent a lot of time early on when I was first trying to make art, and certainly when I was in college as well. I spent a lot of time trying to get away from feeling uncertain, trying to get away from feeling not confident by having like the perfect plan or the big idea or the thing that was going to help me solve everything. And I think I still probably have that tendency in my personality today. But the thing that I learned then and that I am still learning, even when I think I've already learned it, I'll look around and I'll realize, oh no, I'm still just learning that same lesson over again, is that I have to accept the uncertainty, and I have to accept that feels very uncomfortable, the uncertainty, the lack of confidence, and I have to keep moving anyway. So that's number one, the biggest thing that's been a help for me. And then the number two kind of related part of that is getting really familiar and getting very well acquainted with my inner critic and her kind of patterns and proclivities. So the things that she tends to do over and over again, the times that she's the most active, the things that she likes to say. And I'd recommend doing some of that yourself if you really struggle with your own inner critic, which you probably do if you're a human being. So for me, my inner critic tends to be pretty pedestrian, actually. She likes to say a lot of the same things I'm sure your inner critic says to you. Stuff like, that looks terrible, and oh, wow, this is embarrassing, and you are really terrible with color. You're so bad with color, and oh my goodness, if only you had done X differently, this would be so much easier. Or really, if you could just do Y the way that X does, then we would be good. And of course, the favorite, oh, now everyone's going to see what a fraud you are. And I guess my inner critic has that weird voice. I don't know. Actually, it's not that obvious. My inner critic sounds much less silly and is a lot more believable. But yes, I have also observed that I've talked about this in other videos, that my inner critic tends to be the quietest in the morning, which is why I like to do my most creative things in the morning. And then she often gets louder throughout the day. She's also very quiet when I'm playing or when I'm doing really anything that doesn't have an objective. And I mean that not just in relation to art, but also in life. So if I'm just playing Legos with my daughters, then my inner critic is pretty quiet, as opposed to like if I'm trying to make a certain amount of holiday cookies by a certain time, then my inner critic is probably a bit louder. Same goes for art. If I'm just messing around, just doing a personal piece just for fun, my inner critic's probably gonna be pretty quiet. But if I'm working on a deadline, and especially if I'm working on a deadline and I'm stressed, and if I'm working on a deadline and there's maybe been any sort of stickiness with the client or anything that's like difficult, then that's like another factor that will amplify it. There are all these things that will make my inner critic louder and louder and louder. And that doesn't make it go away. I mean, I wish it made it go away. But being aware of these patterns really just helps me to not get so knocked down by them. I think acceptance and awareness are just really key for me in being able to continue moving and growing, even when I feel uncomfortable feelings that I would rather not feel. So I guess the takeaway here, what am I hoping the takeaway here is that none of us ever truly feel really confident. We may become more competent, like I feel I have, but the struggle with your own inner critic and the struggle with self-doubt never goes away. And I think a lot of us spend, I don't want to say waste time, because I don't really ever believe that there's a waste of time. Well, I guess, how do I want to say this? And a lot of us spend really precious time, months and sometimes years, focused on trying to get away from that feeling, trying to get away from the uncomfortable feeling and feeling like once we do that, then we can move forward. When the reality is that it's going to be, those uncomfortable feelings are going to be with you your whole life. And the sooner you accept that and learn to keep growing and moving through that, the sooner you'll be able to actually start achieving some of your goals and working towards accomplishing the things that you want to do with your life, actually making decisions based on your values rather than making decisions based on what you are afraid of. So you'll probably hear more of those themes coming up throughout this series, but that is the intro. That's the first installment. Next week, we are going to talk about communication, which is another big fear, communication and managing revisions. Those two things had a number of different kinds of fears that folks raised, so we're going to unpack all of those. And then looking at my notes here, the week after that, wow, I have a lot of notes, you guys. Week after that, we're going to talk about deadlines, working on deadlines, finishing by deadlines, and managing client boundaries. Another super common, these are all very common fears, things that, multiple people raise. And then installment number 4 is, you could probably guess it, is going to be about money. So that's where we're heading over the next few weeks. Thank you very much for joining in on this video. You can feel free to leave your questions or comments in the place where those go, the replies, the comments. And yeah, I think that's it. I have diffusers up on the wall because I started filming this with lighting and now everything's falling down. So hopefully it doesn't look terrible, but yes, hope you guys are having a great week. Thanks for watching this video and I will see you in the next one. Bye.